Growing up, it was never hard to tell who my parents' favorite was. It wasn't because they made it obvious, though there were times when I'd catch my mother's smile lingering just a little too long when my younger brother ran off the field with his football trophy. It wasn't that they didn't love me, but there was always this space between us. An invisible wall I never quite understood. The kind of wall that isn't built out of bricks or stone but of silence and unspoken words. I was the invisible one. The one who always tried harder but somehow never seemed to matter as much. It was always so clear, my brother was the golden child. He was charming, charismatic, and, above all, athletic. His games, his practices, his triumphs, those were the moments that filled the house with pride. I remember how, when it was his football season, the house would buzz with energy. My mom would make snacks. My dad would pick out the best seat in the stadium, and I would quietly pack my school bag, unsure whether anyone remembered my upcoming event. I would never say anything, never complain, never ask for what I needed. That was just how it was. I convinced myself that it was okay, that I wasn't like my brother and didn't need the same kind of attention. But deep down, I wanted it. I wanted him to see me the way they saw him. I wanted to matter just as much. But it always felt like I didn't. And then came the day that pushed me over the edge. The day I realized just how little my efforts counted. It wasn't just the football games. No, the truth was, my brother was the kind of kid who walked into a room and immediately commanded attention. Whether he was winning a race at field day or scoring a goal in his soccer game. My parents couldn't help but brag about him. And why wouldn't they? He was everything they'd hoped for when they dreamed about what a son should be. The kind of son who could turn heads and make people proud without even trying. I didn't blame him for it. Not exactly. It wasn't his fault that he was good at everything he did. And it wasn't like I hated him. He was my brother, after all, and there were moments when I felt proud of him too, when he helped me with my math homework or when he let me tag along with him and his friends. But those moments always felt fleeting, like they were too rare to matter. It was my parents who made it clear that he came first. And they didn't even realize they were doing it. It wasn't malicious, but I felt it each time they chose his game over my school recital. His band concert over my art exhibit. His success over my struggles. I watched as my father cheered from the sidelines of my brother's games. His voice so full of pride that I could hear it echo in my mind for hours after. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the dinner table, waiting for someone to ask how my day had been, only to be met with polite nods before the conversation moved right back to his latest win. I tried to be the best at something, anything, but no matter what I did, my accomplishments always felt like small victories in a race where the prize had already been given to someone else. I would win a spelling bee, and my mother would give me a quick hug, but I could see her eyes drift toward the clock, waiting for my brother to get home from football practice. I would paint a picture that I was proud of, but the moment would pass without anyone noticing, and when it was his turn to stand in the spotlight, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was used to it, used to feeling invisible, but then something strange happened, something that I thought might change everything. The year I turned 15. Everything seemed to collide in a way that I wasn't prepared for. It was spring, and for once, my school was putting on a big one. Something that felt like it might actually matter. It wasn't just some half-hearted recital or talent show. This was going to be different. My part wasn't huge, but it was enough to make me feel like I finally had a place where I could shine. I practiced for weeks, pouring myself into rehearsals, trying to get every line perfect, every movement just right. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on the edge of something important. But of course, that's when it happened. My brother's football season overlapped with the play. The championship game, his last game of the year, was scheduled for the same night as my performance. I didn't even have to ask. I knew the moment the invitation went out for the play. And I knew the moment I heard my brother's game was at the same time. When my parents sat me down a week before the performance, their words were casual, almost apologetic. "We're really sorry, honey," my mother said. "We're so proud of you for being in the play. But, well, you know how important this game is for your brother. It's the championship." I don't remember what I said. I don't think I said anything at all. I just nodded and smiled like I always did. But inside, something broke. This was the moment I had been waiting for. And once again, I had been cast aside. I spent the entire night before the play practicing my lines in my room, trying to convince myself that it didn't matter. That it didn't matter that my parents wouldn't be there to watch me. That it didn't matter that they would be cheering for my brother, as they always did, in the stands while I stood in front of an empty theater. The night of the performance, I went through the motions. I told myself that I could do this, that I didn't need their approval, and for the first few minutes, it was almost like I believed it. The stage lights were bright, and the applause was warm. But when I looked out into the audience and saw empty seats, when I realized my parents were somewhere miles away, watching my brother's game instead, it hit me. I had never felt more alone. I gave my best performance, but inside, I felt numb. The applause, the praise, all of it seemed distant, like it was happening to someone else. After the show, I stayed behind to help clean up, hoping maybe they would come and see how I'd done. But when my phone buzzed with a message from my mom saying they'd be home late, I realized that the empty space in my chest wasn't going to go away. That night, I went to bed with the weight of years of disappointment pressing down on me. I had been good enough to earn an award, but not good enough to deserve a moment of their time. The thing that stung the most was how easily I'd accepted it. I had accepted being invisible for so long that it no longer hurt. Or so I told myself. I don't remember when it started, but after that night, everything began to feel heavier. I couldn't tell anyone how much it hurt to feel like I was second place in my own family. I kept up the same routine: school, extracurriculars, and trying to make my parents proud, but each time I did, it felt emptier. I started to wonder what the point of it all was. If my parents didn't care about me, if I didn't matter to them, then what did any of it mean? The moments when I thought I had done something impressive felt like hollow victories. Moments that never seemed to last. I tried harder. I threw myself into every activity I could think of. Maybe if I was just good enough at something, anything, maybe then they would see me. But the more I tried, the more I realized that nothing would ever change. It wasn't about what I could do. It was about who I wasn't. There were days when I couldn't even look at my brother without feeling bitter. He didn't deserve their attention more than I did. Did he? I had worked hard, tried my best in every way I knew how. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. The hurt turned into resentment, and the resentment turned into this deep ache that wouldn't go away. One day, I snapped. It wasn't anything big, just a small argument about something stupid. I don't even remember the specifics now, but it was enough to send me over the edge. I couldn't stay in that house anymore, couldn't live in the same room with people who never understood me. That night, I made a decision. I would leave. I packed up my things, made arrangements to stay with a friend, and told my parents I was going. There was no drama, no shouting. It was just quiet, as if they expected it. They had never truly noticed me before, so why would they now? I didn't have a plan. I just needed out. When I left, I thought I would feel free, like I was finally escaping the shadow that had swallowed me my whole life. Instead, I felt untethered. I hadn't thought beyond walking out that door. I moved in with a friend from school, sharing a tiny apartment that always smelled faintly of burnt toast. She didn't ask too many questions, which I appreciated. I told her I needed a change, and she just nodded, as if she understood. At first, it felt like a relief. I didn't have to hear about my brother's latest game or endure the hollow, polite smiles my parents gave me when they asked how I was doing. But freedom wasn't what I expected it to be. Freedom wasn't easy, without the structure of home, even one that hurt. I was lost. I spent most of my days drifting between work and school, trying to hold myself together while quietly hoping that anyone would reach out to ask if I was okay. But they didn't. My parents didn't call. My brother didn't text. It was as if I had disappeared, and the world had gone on just fine without me. The ache that had always simmered in the background grew louder. I began to wonder if maybe they were better off without me. If maybe I was the one who had been holding myself back all along. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that I didn't care, the truth lingered. I wanted him to notice. I wanted him to miss me. I don't know when it started to change. Maybe it was gradual, like the first hints of light after a long, dark night. Or maybe it was something small, a conversation, a moment of clarity, a song on the radio that made me pause. But one day, I realized that I was tired of waiting for them, tired of measuring my worth by what they thought of me. It wasn't easy. Letting go of years of pain doesn't happen overnight. But I began to see glimpses of a life that wasn't defined by their approval. I threw myself into my studies, not because I wanted to prove something to them, but because I wanted to prove something to myself. I took up painting again, filling cheap canvases with splashes of color that didn't make sense to anyone but me. I started to laugh more real, genuine laughter that didn't feel like a mask. I even began to make friends. Real friends. The kind who didn't care about who I was or wasn't to my family. They saw me for who I was, someone flawed. Yes, but someone who was trying. Slowly, I started to feel like maybe I wasn't invisible after all. Maybe I had just been looking for the wrong kind of light. Months passed, then a year. I had settled into a life that felt smaller, but in a good way. It was quieter, more mine, and then, out of nowhere, came the phone call. It was my brother. I stared at my phone, unsure whether to answer. It had been so long since I'd spoken to him, and I wasn't sure if I could handle whatever he had to say. But something in me, a mix of curiosity and something I couldn't quite name, made me press accept. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "I know it's been a while." He went on to explain that he was graduating soon, and he wanted me to come. He didn't say it outright, but I could hear it in his voice, the uncertainty, the awkwardness of someone trying to bridge a gap they weren't sure how to cross. "Mom and Dad miss you," he added. "They just don't know how to say it." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell him that they had never cared enough to say anything before. But another part of me, the part that had begun to heal, knew that anger wouldn't change the past. "I'll think about it," I said finally, and I meant it. The graduation was a small, sunlit affair on a crisp spring morning. I hadn't planned to go, but when the day arrived, something pulled me there. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the tiny sliver of hope that had grown in me over the past year. Whatever it was, I found myself sitting in the back row of folding chairs, watching as my brother walked across the stage to accept his diploma. I stayed in the shadows, not wanting to draw attention. But after the ceremony, as people milled about taking photos and congratulating one another, he found me. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice a mix of relief and surprise. I shrugged, unsure how to respond. I wasn't sure I would. For a moment, neither of us spoke, and then, almost hesitantly, he said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't enough to undo years of pain. But it was something, and for the first time, I felt like maybe he saw me not as the sibling he had always overshadowed, but as a person in my own right. Later, when my parents approached me, it was awkward. My mother fidgeted with her purse strap, and my father cleared his throat like he was about to give a speech. "We've missed you," my mom said finally, "and we're proud of you." I didn't know if I believed them. Not entirely, but I nodded and said, "Thanks," because maybe forgiveness wasn't about them. Maybe it was about me. I didn't move back home. I didn't fall back into old patterns. But something shifted after that day. My brother and I started talking, more small conversations at first, then longer ones. He told me about how hard it had been to always feel like he had to live up to everyone's expectations. I told him about how it had felt to be invisible. Slowly, we began to understand each other in a way we never had before. My parents and I remained distant, but the bitterness faded. I no longer needed their approval to feel like I mattered. I had built a life that was mine. A life that felt whole in a way I never thought possible. In the end, it wasn't about them, it was about me, about learning to see myself not through their eyes, but through my own, about finding value in who I was, not in who I thought I needed to be. And for the first time, I felt free.